Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Xingyu. I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator. I'm very happy to be here today. And also, Sarah, our museum educator, will be joining us today to talk about some art pieces and to take a closer look at them.
Thank you so much. Yes, so my name is Sarah Rasich, and as Shin you mentioned, I'm in the education department. I'm the senior coordinator of school and teacher programs, or school and teacher content, sorry, at the museum. And that means that one of my big interests is in how folks engage with artworks, and I'm really interested in the kinds of messaging and the kind of meaning they are able to make from artworks. So I'm excited that you all are joining me here today for this presentation that we're calling First Impressions. And this is, in a sense, a little bit of a play on words and thinking about the ways that we encounter artworks and the ways that we engage in them and the ways in which those engagements kind of resonate with how artists encounter their worlds and take those impressions of their experience and put them out as artworks for us to experience and enjoy. So one of the ways we can think of the idea of first impressions is, of course, kind of a snap judgment, if you will, a way to get kind of oriented, a sort of surface engagement, right? So we get a first impression of something. And then we can also think of it as the idea that an impression is what we're left with. So what are we walking away from an artwork thinking more about? So I would pose the idea that when we're interacting or encountering artworks, impressions come first in a way. So we're gonna think about this in a different way and sort of insert that comma. So rather than first impressions, it's first impressions. And the first artwork that we're going to look at today was one that I encountered as I was just taking a walk through the museum, which I get to do, of course, all the time. It's a work that I was not very familiar with or hadn't spent much time with myself, but as I was walking through this gallery, I was drawn to it and interested in it. And so I took the opportunity to think about my first impressions of this artwork, take a closer look, build on those first impressions, and then take what it left me with thinking about to move through the galleries and find some other works. And so I was taking one impression to the next to the next. So that's what we're going to do today. This artwork is located in the Mellon French galleries at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. It's the one on the screen here on the far left. So you can see it's with some other images, some other pictures. These are all paintings. And this one is quite small. It is about 14 and a half. The image itself is about 14 and a half inches by 23 inches. And you can add maybe about 3.5 inches to that all around with the frame. So here it is. I'm going to now show it to you. And I'm interested in knowing if you are comfortable throwing into the Q&A your first impression of this piece. And by that, I mean sort of what kind of quality does it have for you? What is your first reaction to it? And try to think perhaps beyond what you recognize as subject matter and sort of think about your first impression. I'm going to give you a moment to throw that into the Q&A if you can. And I'll share with you as you all are thinking about that some of the things that dreamlike is one. Awesome. Yeah, it has a dreamlike quality to it. I can see that happening. Another person is saying that it's muddy to them, that it's not particularly attractive to them, that they might not give it a second look, which is totally fair. Any other thoughts? I'll share with you that the folks that we took through the galleries when we were doing this 3 and 30 in person had similar thoughts about this piece. Some people talked about that muted, muddy quality to the color palette, that it's very muted. The idea that it's dreamlike was something that resonated with people. They talked about it being fuzzy, sort of unclear. There are not sharp lines to this piece. Okay, so now you've had a chance to maybe get a little closer to it, which is difficult to do on these virtual programs, but you would have been able to do in the galleries. And it's interesting to see again as we're looking closely, Edouard Vuillard, who's the painter of this particular object, and he's working. This is made about 1898. I'm curious to sort of hear a little bit more about, now that you've had a couple more minutes with this piece, um, if you can go beyond your first impression and now think about what's catching your eye, or what's a little bit possibly more interesting about this piece for you. And as you all think about that, I'll share some of the responses we got in the galleries. Some people were very interested in, beyond this color palette and this muted color palette, the way that light is organized in this object. Yes, and I'll get to a comment that we just got in the Q&A. Somebody can't figure out what's happening behind the man on the left side and the back. And this was something that when we were in the galleries, people were very interested in too. So you can see that in the foreground of this piece, you can see this figure. He's pretty discernible as somebody probably sitting on a couch reading. We can also tell that from the title. We're directed to know that this is an interior, there's a man reading. What we're a little bit more uncertain about is what's going on back here. And we can also see that there's a real almost binary or counterplay between these two parts of the canvas. So when we were in the gallery, a lot of people noticed or thought about the fact that this right-hand side of the canvas is much lighter, and that what's happening on the left side of the canvas is even more muted than that right side, which has already started out to be kind of muted, and that these figures back here are kind of in silhouette. And it's difficult to tell what they are doing. Vuillard is still giving us body language, right? He still has, we can tell that or think about these or imagine them as figures. They're sort of hunched together. They're lit either from that window or possibly a lamp on the table with them. And it's causing them to be in silhouette, but we can't tell what they're doing. And this was actually also a point of frustration for the people that were looking at this object in the gallery as well. We then talked a little bit about what that curiosity brought up with us, sort of what might Vuillard's relationship be to these people. Somebody mentioned that the man seems to be in pajamas. So we thought that this was quite an intimate space. These people are probably people he knew well. And that's quite likely. So Vuillard is somebody who's painting very often in his own domestic space. And I shared with the group that that he lived with his mother, with his sister, and at this point also with his brother-in-law, and that his mother was a seamstress and had a business that she operated out of the house. And some people in the galleries then said, well, possibly that's what is happening in the back, that this is a more feminine space, that these women are working together. Someone mentioned it reminded them of a sewing circle. And that was kind of an aha moment for me, because then I began to think about, well, maybe this is a moment Vuillard has noticed the way in which the domestic space has kind of distinct spheres for him. So you have this man reading in the foreground here, off on his own. Presumably this is a newspaper or something. So he's kind of starting his day, thinking about what's happening in the world. And what's going on back here is much more intimate with this small grouping, possibly of women. And we're not, I don't know for sure. But it was really interesting to me. And also I will say that this little silhouetted group is what I was left thinking about when I left this gallery and started walking through the other galleries. So we're going to now move, in the interest of time, to our next piece. So I was walking through the galleries and I came across this piece, the one on the right here. It is by a Richmond artist. She was born in Richmond, named Willie Ann Wright. So we're moving from France back all the way over to Virginia. And we're moving forward quite a few decades and century even. And we are positioning ourselves in the mid part of the 20th century. So this is our pop art gallery. And this painting by Willie Ann Wright is situated with some other works by pop artists. And you can see on the left a little smidgen of a work by Rosalind Drexler. So for this one, we'll get a little closer to it. I asked the audience that we were with in person to, as we're coming across this piece, and I'll share with you that I was intrigued by the fact that there are silhouettes in this one as well. That's kind of what caught my eye, moving from Vuillard to this Willie Ann Wright painting. But I'd seen this painting several times, and I got thinking about that sort of foreground with those silhouetted figures. And I'd be interested to know your first impressions of this piece, moving from the Vuillard to this one. In what ways it might be different, in what ways you might recognize things, or if there's anything about the subject matter here that is recognizable to you. Okay. So we got to peruse around this one a little bit, and I'd be interested to know what your first impressions are of this piece, if you were able to build on them at all by looking more closely at this artwork. And I can share a few observations and thoughts that the in-gallery audience had noticed. And one of those was just that I recognized the television, somebody said. And we'd had a little talk about, yeah, that's a television, but it's very definitely not a big flat screen television. It's of smaller scale. It has to be operated by hand. It's got knobs. It's got a speaker. You have to sort of tune it and change the channel. And that got us thinking about the striations that are across the surface of the television. And the idea that it's not a smooth picture, that it might flicker and change a little as we're watching. And that the silhouetted figures are sort of looking both at the television and at one another. So there's a sort of communal aspect to this watching that's happening in this piece. And then finally, somebody noticed the upper portion, there's a new sort of register separate from the main kind of image, where Willie Ann Wright has sort of placed repeatedly the same image of her painting, or that's in her painting, as if it also is a television. So you can see at the very top the, right here, there's a difference between how the silhouettes are treated down here, where they're flat, and in these three repeated images where they've been almost subsumed by the television. They've become the watchers being watched almost. They are themselves televised, which is a really fun and playful way to think about image making. And again, feel free to chime in the chat about this. I'll sort of keep talking, but Willie Ann Wright is a formidable artist. She's very prolific. She's still with us, born in 1924. So she's had a long and interesting career. And this painting is made really pretty close to the beginning of her career. She, at this point, is painting. She has not yet quite moved into printmaking, but she is most known for her interactions and for interest in photography. VMFA recently had a wonderful exhibition of hers, a retrospective of sorts called Willie Ann Wright, Artist and Alchemist, which is fantastic. If anybody's seen it, it's great. And then we have a portion on our collections page where you can learn a little bit more about her through a collection story. But at this point in her career, she's really intrigued with this moment in 1968, 1967, when she makes this painting and a series of paintings like it. She's very intrigued by the fact that we are really, images come to us in a mediated sense. They come to us, as she says, through television, through newspapers. To her, there's sort of a ubiquity in the mediated image, which of course today she's still witnessing in a much, much more compounded way with the internet and the screens that are all around us and with us. But it's intriguing to see too the way that she has treated this image in the television as a photographic negative. So areas that might be light are dark, and areas that might be dark are light. Kind of a flipping of the script of image making. And she talks too about how, for her, she thinks very playfully about images. She has fun with this intellectual exercise of contemplating the way in which we take in visual information and respond to it. Um, and she talks about this one being made from a moment where she is, this and several others like it, where she's with her husband, Jack, who at the time was a photographer and taking a lot of pictures as well. And they're at a friend's house. They're watching color television, which is a new uh, innovation at this point in time. And they're watching color television, and they're watching, people on TV, and he snaps pictures of this interaction. And she later uses those as the impetus for sort of interrogating or thinking about this idea of mediated images. And the series of paintings happens to come up. And here we have this one called Indo Orange Connie. The folks in the galleries when we were there were able to sort of put two and two together and think of this as Connie Francis, which it in fact probably is. She is a singer who's incredibly popular in the 60s and early 70s, and she is often seen on the Ed Sullivan Show. And Willie Ann Wright, I can imagine her sitting and watching the Ed Sullivan Show, perhaps this one, which is a performance in 1926. This is just a screenshot of a YouTube performance that the Ed Sullivan Show has put up. And you can see this beautiful orange dress that Connie is wearing. And I will show you too that later I found a clip from the same show where she is singing, and the camera has zoomed in really tight to the face, much in the way Willie Ann Wright. I can't first say for sure, but I'm wondering if this was perhaps a moment that Jack was able to capture in his camera, or even one that just Willie Ann Wright remembered from that evening. But the way that she's captured the color from that performance in new and different ways here, the way she's presented Indo Orange Connie on the screen. And Indo Orange, by the way, is a very new color at the time. It's been introduced as an acrylic color by Liquitex, who's a brand that Willie Ann Wright. So this painting is really interesting in a lot of different ways. I don't think I would have gotten to know all this or be curious about all this if I hadn't thought more about these silhouettes after looking at the Vuillard. But this painting left me with the impression or the thinking about the ways in which images and media kind of pervade our lives. And sometimes we pass them by, and sometimes we don't think about them that much. But that sometimes artworks can provoke us to do that. And so this next artist, this next artwork, we're going to go into our 21st century galleries. And look at this piece in the center. This piece is quite a bit larger. I guess we're kind of growing in scale as we go along, from Vuillard's little painting to Willie Ann Wright's slightly larger one. This one's even bigger. So this piece that's in the center of this image is closer to about 4 feet wide by about 6 feet high, the entire piece. And then the sort of central image itself is a tiny bit smaller, by like 4.5 by 3.5 feet. And it's in our 21st century galleries with a couple of other pieces, one by Willie Cole that's on the left, and one by Alison Saar that's on the right. And so as you're in the gallery with this piece and with these other objects, your first impression may kind of lend itself towards thinking about materials and the ways that the artworks are made. And I'm going to give you slightly closer view of this one. Unfortunately, this one is really best seen live in a person. So if you're able to get to the VMFA and look at it, I really encourage you to do so. When we were in the galleries, I asked the group to not only consider their first impression with this piece, but their first impulse with it. And their first impulse was to come closer. And I'll show you why. So here we are a little bit closer to the piece. And you can get a sense that there's an image that's been almost obstructed. And if you were in the galleries and moving with this piece, you'd see that it has a shimmer to it um, that sort of exacerbates that sense of image behind something else. And if we get even closer, we can see how this artist, Wilmer Wilton Forth, has made this artwork. And it's quite extraordinary. Hopefully you were able to see that those are staples. Thousands of them arranged carefully in an almost meditative way on that image, creating a kind of circular effect. And you can see that behind those staples is an image. And if you're able or feel comfortable doing it, I'd love for you to, oh my gosh, sorry, I have missed the chat. Oh, heavens. Oh gosh. I want to read a little bit of what we have in the Q&A for you all. A lot of information about the smaller TV screens at the top. It looks like a 50s living room watching comic book characters, and that had a rear window Hitchcock quality. That's awesome. Yeah, really great. Okay, I'm so sorry that I missed that. I'm going to keep scrolling. Anyway, with this piece, I'm curious to know your first impression of the image that you see here. So not so much the materials that it's made with, but what you can kind of try to discern in this image on this piece. Two people in love. I'm interested. Yeah. So like the other pieces, we have figures involved here. And whenever there are people in artworks, we can kind of place ourselves in those shoes and sort of think about the body language. We see the tilt of a head, tilt of a shoulder. So there's definitely an intimacy to here. So maybe this is a couple, two people in love. Any other thoughts about the image that we can see behind all these staples? Perhaps a magazine cover. Yeah, and that's something that the people in the gallery noticed as well, that this image looks as if it's from something that's been printed. It's quite large, as I mentioned. The image itself is about 4 feet, 4.5 feet by 3.5 feet. So we might think a little bit more in terms of a poster or an advertisement. And we noticed that up in the upper left, we see a little bit of the word original, perhaps, with the O missing, and that there's a date in the upper right-hand corner, and that there's some larger words down on the bottom. And Wilson gives us a clue as to what those larger words might be with the title of this piece, which is Black and Wood. So a fragmented, kind of truncated poster, sort of a leftover or an ephemeral piece of printed material. Yeah, and if we look back at how he's made it with the staples, you can see that it's almost this pixelation in the center kind of indicates it has that poster printed quality, right? It's not smooth like a sort of printed photograph that we might see, but it's blown up and kind of pixelated like that. And he kind of further pixelates it or makes it harder to see with the staples. Is there anything about this piece that frustrates you at all or that intrigues you? And what do you make of all of these staples on top of this image? Frustration, can't see the image clearly or into totality. Yeah. Oh, and fixing it in time, the idea of the staples kind of keeping it in a certain place. I love that idea. I think Wilmer Wilson would love both of these ideas. The staples kind of give it an appearance of a vinyl record. Yes, that is something that we heard from the gallery audience as well, that this circles kind of call to mind music or music making, or almost that mediation of music, right? If a TV is for an image, a vinyl record might be for music. Does frustration doesn't have a history or maybe perhaps a future? Excellent. Yeah, very interesting to think about. Again, this sort of captured moment in time. Um, we it's difficult to place. We don't even get that full date that something's happening in December. And what is the history? Um, and all of these really, just in the interest of time, I'll kind of give you a little bit more what I know of how Wilmer Wilson IV works, and the kinds of things he's interested in, and the ways in which your reactions or thoughts might resonate with those interests. And Wilmer Wilson is an artist fairly new in his career. He graduated with his MFA in 2015, but he was born in Richmond. He now works and lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Interestingly, his father was for quite a time an associate in our gallery, so would have and was able before he passed away a couple of years ago, was able to see Wilmer's piece in the VMFA's collection. But Wilson is really interested in urban spaces, and he's very, very interested in the way we pass through those spaces and the way ephemera works and images work, but also those things in conjunction with perceptions of race and Black bodies, and how all those things move in the urban sphere. And this idea of posters and advertisings that might be stuck up, plastered onto plywood throughout cities. I'm sure you all have seen them, or even telephone poles where staples are used to fix in time, just a moment of announcement or advertising. And that we don't necessarily take in or pay attention to those things. Yeah, the spiraling staples. Yes, exactly. We don't necessarily take those things in. I'm going to stop sharing, just so we can wrap up. But Wilson is very interested in this idea of ephemera, the staples almost as skin. And he's a fascinating artist. I would highly encourage you to look at his work. He is a performance artist. He's a photographer. He's a sculptor. He works in all kind of media. But the idea of the staples as a skin, as a sort of looking device, forcing our interest in a way, and our eyes to really be more intrigued by the images he presents, is one way that he works. And my last thing I'd like to say is, as I mentioned, he's at the beginning of his career. We've only seen or gotten a first impression of these artists too, their entire oeuvre, by looking at just one work of theirs. So if you get the chance to come to the VMFA to look at these pieces, to look at the pieces that surround them, to maybe look more at the artists who made them, I promise it would be a great experience. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your creative thoughts. It's very inspiring. And yeah, thank you, Sarah.
You're very welcome.